If us as a major importer doesn't have that 90-day supply, the price shock from increases in fuel costs will ripple across the economy. It's basically a really important measure to maintain some stability and sort of evenness in our supply. And in a worst-case scenario, if there was a disruption from those OPEC-producing countries, if a genuine shortage of supply eventuated, we would be at a standstill. We would have trucks and ships unable to move produce from the regions to the city, and a breakdown of the usual functioning of our economy. So there's really good reasons as to why this 90 days of supply is a sensible measure. But Australia hasn't been compliant with that. It's been over 5 years since Australia held 90 days of liquid fuel stocks. And as of April this year, Australia only holds 51 days of liquid fuel reserves. This didn't used to be a big issue for us. We used to produce much more of our oil products ourselves, but we have now in a situation where we are largely an oil product importer. So the government's proposed way of procuring these liquid fuel stock holdings is by purchasing tickets. So we actually don't have to have the 90 days of supply here physically in the country, but we've got tickets on it. So there's oil supply somewhere else in the world that's identified as belonging to Australia. And this was identified by the department during our inquiry as the least cost option to bring Australia into IEA compliance. So under this ticketing contract, the seller agrees to reserve on behalf of the buyer a predetermined amount of oil in return for an agreed fee. And during the contractual period, the buyer, in this case Australia, has the option to purchase all or part of the reserved oil stock. The price is determined by a market-based rate under the contract, or if we don't want it under that period of time, we can release the stock back into the global oil market. And the entity who's going to be selling these tickets, this option to buy, could either be a public or a private owner of oil stocks. And I mean, this is the second best option. There are merits to requiring actual real oil supplies. Obviously, that sort of ticket system could break down in a global emergency as well. But that we do note that there are substantially increased costs that would be required if we were going to maintain those 90 days of oil supply physically in Australia. So the Greens support the government in using this proposed ticket system and these ticketing contracts to secure sufficient reserves as a mechanism to bring us back into IEA compliance. And like Senator Xenophon has noted, we'll wait and see whether this ticketing system is a useful and a viable enough measure in order to be able to do this. But of course, this is only one half of the story. If you're talking about maintaining security of liquid fuel supplies, there are other ways of going about it, rather than presuming that we are going to continue to be in the situation where 95% of our transport fuel, or of our fuels, are coming from oil-based products. So there's another whole way of moving to give ourselves fuel security. So the other key way is reducing our dependence on these oil fuels, on these fossil fuels and these liquid hydrocarbons in the first place. We know that in terms of needing this oil supply, that the key drivers of it are our transport sector. So if we're going to shift from having this reliance of foreign oil supplies, we've got to work to be making sure that we can shift the fuels being used by our transport sector onto non-fossil based, onto renewable fuels. Because the transport sector, it accounts for 3/4 of our liquid fuel demand. So that means that if we're serious about fuel security and serious about our compliance with our stockholding requirements, we need to decrease the use of oil in our transport sector. So not only would this reduce our reliance on oil, but it would have very, very many other benefits as well.